They are now making arrests here. We were bringing this to you live. People have stormed into Trump Tower protesting the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University graduate student, former graduate student, who has riled up so much of the anti-Semitism that we've seen, not just on Columbia, but other campuses as well. There's a big dispute going on right now between the Trump administration and Democrats and these supporters of Khalil's who say he has been unfairly detained. But what we're hearing from the administration is Khalil has been at the nexus of this anti-Semitism and the violent protests we've seen on some of these college campuses. You can think about the one building they took over at Columbia months ago and detained. They actually held a janitor hostage. We see the arrest now here at Trump Tower. Can we hear what they're chanting? We don't have the audio. But you can see them getting loud, and you can see the police finally moving in. And one of the things I think that we need to note here is you can see, we mentioned before that there were police in the corners. Now we see more police show up, overwhelming force. Let's listen in and see if we can hear what they're chanting. Hard to make out what they're saying. Perhaps that's for the best in this type of situation, but this is the continuation, I guess the third day now of these protests that we've seen. A couple of days ago, we saw some protests in Lower Manhattan. Those led to arrest. We saw the demonstrations yesterday at the courthouse, and we saw the hearing where the judge was weighing whether this was a free speech issue. We saw Susan Sarandon there for that. And now today we see this inside Trump Tower, specifically on the private property of the current president. And you can hear them chanting here, "Free Mahmoud." They're chanting "Free Mahmoud," and obviously they're supporting Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University graduate student. So one of the things we've heard from Democrats in support of Mahmoud Khalil, specifically Senator Chuck Schumer, said while he abhors, quote unquote, what Mahmoud Khalil stands for, his support of Hamas, he does believe that this is not an issue for the Justice Department to look into. He believes this is something that Columbia University should be able to handle themselves. But what we saw previously is a complete failure from these institutions of higher learning in their ability to deal with these protests. We saw several people actually fired. Remember the congressional hearings we saw on Capitol Hill as well, when there was just a complete ignorance about how deeply rooted the anti-Semitism had become on campus. And this now has again cropped up because the Trump administration has said simply they will no longer support this type of activity. These anti-Israeli, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian protests started to show up again on Columbia at Barnard College. Again, we've been covering this for a couple of weeks now, and it continues to manifest. And although we do see some action now, police moving into Trump Tower, this protest, from what we can tell, began shortly before noon today. People somehow forced their way into Trump Tower, which, if you've been there in the past, there is an open atrium where people can come and go. There's retail stores, restaurants there. Don't know if these people were allowed in wearing those T-shirts. I imagine that may not have been the case, or somehow maybe they forced themselves in. But the situation is now, you can see at least 3 or 4 dozen protesters there in the atrium of Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan. I'm sure many of you have been there or have been by the building before, a very busy part of town, and they are making their voices heard. Although, again, something we should point out, this is private property. This is not the public square. That's why the police are in there arresting them. You can